It was pouring rain that night, one of those relentless downpours that makes driving almost impossible. I'd just finished a late shift at work and was heading home on a back road trying to avoid the main highway traffic. The road was poorly lit with dense woods on either side, and I had to keep my windshield wipers on high just to see a few feet ahead. That's when I noticed a pair of hazard lights flashing up ahead. As I got closer, I saw an old pickup truck pulled off to the side of the road. A man was standing next to it, waving me down. He was wearing a baseball cap and a rain jacket, and he looked soaked to the bone. To be honest, I'm not the kind of person who usually stops for strangers, but something about him seemed desperate. I slowed down and rolled down my window just a crack, enough to hear him over the rain. He gestured to the hood of his truck and told me that he had pulled over to wait out the rain, but when he tried to turn his truck back on, it wouldn't start. He said he thought it was his battery and asked if I could help him jump it. I thought it was odd that his truck battery would just randomly die in the middle of nowhere, but the truck looked old and the rain was absolutely ruthless, so against my better judgment, I agreed, turned my car around to face his truck, pulled over, and got out. The rain was icy cold and it immediately started soaking through my clothes. The man thanked me and we walked over to the hood of his truck. I'm not a car person, so I just sort of stood there awkwardly. I didn't see anything that looked out of the ordinary. He was shining his flashlight down at the battery and was examining the terminals or something, then gestured toward the back of his truck. He asked me if I wouldn't mind grabbing the jumper cables from the toolbox in the bed. I hesitated, but nodded, not wanting to seem rude, and began walking to the back of his truck. As I walked toward the bed of the truck, I happened to glance through the window of the passenger side door and stopped in my tracks. Through the rain-streaked window, I could see directly into the passenger seat, which was completely illuminated by my headlights pointed at his truck. I had to refocus my eyes, and for a second I could not believe what I was looking at. The entire passenger side of the truck was covered top to bottom in some kind of plastic covering, but not in a seat cover type of way. More like he was trying to prevent anything whatsoever from getting on the interior of the passenger side of the vehicle. I'd never seen anything like it, and it took my brain time to process what I was seeing. On the seat sat a pair of steel handcuffs, a roll of duct tape, and a large knife. My first instinct was to look away, like I had violated his privacy, but I couldn't. The items were arranged so deliberately, like they were waiting for someone to grab them in a hurry. And then I noticed the man. He was watching me around the side of the open hood. Our eyes met and I saw his face change. The polite, desperate expression was gone. I just stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do, then forced myself to turn and keep walking toward the back of the truck, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached the toolbox and opened it, pretending to look for the jumper cables. Behind me, I heard his footsteps sloshing through the mud. He called out, asking if I had found the cables. Then I heard the passenger door open and close. Without thinking, I began running to my car. He shouted at me to stop, and I heard the unmistakable sound of him running after me. I reached my car just as he grabbed for me, and his fingers grazed the back of my jacket. It sounded like he slipped and fell down. I yanked the door open, slammed it shut, and hit the lock button just as he started banging on the window. He was screaming at me and started punching the glass of my driver's side window. He was hitting it so hard, I'm amazed it didn't break. I was so frazzled I didn't know what to do. I took out my phone and began to dial 911 when he ran around to the passenger side of my vehicle, yanking on the handle and shouting something. I immediately threw my phone down and slammed the car into reverse, backing away from him as fast as I could. As I turned the car around, I almost got myself stuck on the side of the road because it was so muddy. I drove away as fast and safely as I could, seeing his silhouette standing behind me in the road, illuminated by his headlights. He began running to his vehicle, presumably to chase me, but I had gained enough ground that I was able to get out of that area before he could catch up to me. I didn't stop driving until I got home, and even then I checked the locks twice before calling the police again. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but the way he reacted when I decided to leave told me that I narrowly avoided something terrible. It was one of those rare nights during the winter where instead of snowing, it rains. It felt like it would never let up. It had been pouring non-stop, and I was just sitting watching TV, relaxing after dinner. Then, out of nowhere, there was this knock at the door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was loud and frantic, like whoever it was really needed something. At first, I thought it might be one of my neighbors, but I live on the edge of the neighborhood and no one ever comes by, especially this late. I just kind of sat there for a second, wondering if I should even answer, but then it came again, louder this time. I got up, went to the door, and called through the door, asking who it was. A woman yelled back, saying she was looking for her daughter. She said her little girl had wandered off in the rain, and she was afraid she was lost or hurt. I peeked through the blinds on the window near the door. She was standing on my porch, completely drenched. She looked to be in her mid-30s, wearing a soaked hoodie. She had her hood down and the rain was streaming down her face. Nothing about her screamed dangerous, but something just felt off. Her eyes weren't just focused on the door. She was looking around at the windows and the sides of the house. I cracked the door open, just a little, and kept the chain on, asking her what her daughter looked like. She told me that her daughter was 8, with brown hair and a pink jacket. She said she thought she came through this area and asked if she could look in my backyard. Her story didn't make any sense. If she thought her daughter was outside, why wasn't she calling out her name? And why come to my front door before checking the yard? I told her I hadn't seen or heard anything, but that I could call the police for her. There was this long pause. Her expression shifted just for a second, and then she forced a smile and said, no, that's okay. That it was fine and that she just really needed to check the backyard. At this point, I was getting more uneasy, but I didn't want to escalate things. I told her to hang on, closed the door, and grabbed my cell phone. I dialed 911 and began speaking to them. I was shaking a little as I walked back to the door, making sure the chain was still locked before opening it again. When I told her I was on the phone with the police, she didn't respond right away. She just stared at me through the crack in the door, and then out of nowhere she shoved her hand through the opening and grabbed at the chain. She started screaming to let her in and began yanking on the door. I panicked and threw my weight against it, managing to push her arm out and slam the door shut. She began banging on the door, hard, frantic pounding. She was screaming at me to open the door. Suddenly, I heard something else, the sound of footsteps sloshing through the mud outside. I crept to the kitchen, trying to be as quiet as possible. When I peeked out the back window, I could barely see through the rain, but I caught a glimpse of movement, someone running along the side of the house. That's when I realized she wasn't alone. I grabbed a knife from the counter and locked myself in the bathroom, whispering to the 911 operator as quietly as I could. I told them someone was trying to break into my house and that I thought there were at least 2 of them. It felt like it took forever before I heard the sirens. By the time the police arrived, whoever it was had taken off. They found muddy footprints leading from my front porch to the back door, then into the woods behind my house. The scariest part was that the cops told me they'd gotten another call earlier that week. Same description, same story, but in a different neighborhood. That time someone had let the woman in. They wouldn't tell me what had happened after that, but judging by the look on the officers' faces, it wasn't good. I keep thinking about how calm she seemed, how she was able to flip so quickly from pleading to threatening, and I can't stop wondering what would have happened if I hadn't managed to keep the door shut. It had been raining for hours, and I was exhausted. I'd been driving back from a work trip in a different state, and the storm had made the last 100 miles feel extremely long. If you've never driven a long distance through terrible weather, let me tell you, it's a miserable experience. Visibility was terrible, and I could barely keep my eyes open. Somewhere just off the highway, I spotted the neon sign of a motel. It wasn't the kind of place I'd normally stay. It was pretty run down, single story, with a vacancy sign that had a couple dead letters in it, but I wasn't in a position to be picky. I pulled into the lot, grateful to get off the roads. The front office was small, with one of those old school bells on the counter. I rang it, and after a moment, a man shuffled out from the back. He looked pretty ragged, with messy hair and a stained shirt, but it didn't seem like this place cared much about appearances anyway. He gave me a once-over before handing me a key to room 8 at the far end of the lot. He told me that the heat works, but not to expect much else. I didn't respond, I just took the key and headed to my room. The rain was coming down so hard, my clothes were almost totally wet by the time I got inside. The room was exactly what I expected. Outdated furniture, stained carpet, and the faint smell of mildew. But the bed looked clean enough and I was too tired to care. I locked the door, double-checked the safety latch, and tried to relax. The rain hitting the windows was oddly soothing, and after scrolling on my phone for a bit, I started to doze off. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound. At first I thought it was part of a dream, but then I heard it again, a faint, deliberate click. I sat up in bed. The sound was coming from the door. There was no bedside lamp, so I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The room was empty, but when I pointed the light at the door, I saw the lock jiggle slightly. Someone was trying to open it. I froze. The safety latch was still in place, but the rattling continued. I forced myself to move closer to the door, keeping my breathing as quiet as possible, peeking through the peephole. I was confused. It was the motel clerk. I noticed he was holding something in his other hand as he fiddled with the doorknob. Then the lock clicked open. I started to panic, but the security latch caught the door, stopping him from getting in. He muttered something under his breath, then pulled up whatever he had in his other hand, slid it through the small gap in the door, and started fumbling with the latch, trying to get it to fold back down. My heart started racing. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and told them what was going on. During this, the clerk stopped fiddling with the latch, then I heard him curse under his breath and walk away from the door. I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher, relocking the door, but then I heard something else, a car door opening. Through a small crack in the curtain, I saw him rummaging through my glove compartment in the center console of my car. He pulled out what appeared to be my registration and stared at it for a long time before looking back at my room. It looked like the tool he tried to open the motel door with was the same thing he opened my car with, which was one of those tools that tow truck drivers use to open locked vehicles. He dug through the whole vehicle, putting a couple things in his pockets, then started walking back toward the office. That's when, out of nowhere, I saw headlights sweep across the lot. The clerk turned to face the police car pulling in. He tried throwing the tool into the bushes at the edge of the parking lot and act casual, but it was too late. The officers were already out of the car, shining their flashlights on him. They questioned him right there in the lot, while one of them came to check on me. When I explained what happened, they searched his pockets and found my registration, along with some loose bills that I honestly forgot were even in the center console. It turns out he'd been doing this for years. He'd used the motel to prey on travelers, robbing their rooms while they were sleeping or out, and breaking into their cars. I packed up and left immediately, driving straight through the rest of the night. I don't stay in motels anymore. It's just not worth the risk.